What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, April 30th, 2019, last day of the month here. Tomorrow is May Day. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations here. And obviously the big news right now, Venezuela's popping. It's very much in play. And now we have supposedly Guido has ensconced himself at a military base just outside Caracas. He's calling on the people of Venezuela and the military to rise up and basically force Maduro out. Looking at the video coming from Caracas, though, it doesn't look like there's a really huge crowd. They had a couple of thousand showed up at the beginning. They've kind of fizzled out. And it's looking more and more to me like this is not gaining the traction they were talking about. And so now we've got U.S. military leaders saying, well, it's time for military intervention. Bolton is out there saying there must be a peaceful transfer of power from Maduro to Guido. I don't think it's going to happen. Bolton is calling on the Venezuelan military to protect the Venezuelan constitution by backing the Guido coup attempt. And I think Bolton speaks with forked tongue on that one. This whole constitutional issue has already been gone over. Maduro is the constitutional president. Guido's attempt to usurp the power basically violates that constitution. But Bolton is trying to use the word constitution to say, oh, well, if you believe in the constitution, then you must support Guido. Now, the Venezuelan defense minister says the army stands with Maduro. He's denouncing Guido as a traitor. And so it's getting tense. Now, Guido's claiming he has some military backing in his attempt to oust Maduro. And obviously, if he is ensconced in that military base, somebody there in the chain of command is saying that's okay. So we'll see what's going to happen there. There are clashes between pro-regime and pro-Guido forces. There's been tear gas. There's been gunfire, unfortunately. And apparently Guido has set up a defensive perimeter at the La Carlota Air Base in Caracas. So, okay. Heavy gunfire crackled through the Venezuelan capital on Tuesday after opposition leader Juan Guaido called for a military uprising to oust President Maduro. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the live feed now on Fox News. It isn't a huge throng. In fact, mostly they're just standing there. Some of them are getting hit with the water cannons. I don't think they're getting the traction. I don't think they're getting the traction at all here. So, Venezuela's in play. I have to be very honest here. I have to be very, very honest. I would love nothing better than for this to fall flat on its face. Not because I give a care about Maduro or Guaido, but because it would be a major failure for the U.S. war machine, coming hard on the heels of Syria. And I noticed that Bolton is out there screaming that Maduro is being protected by Cuban thugs, so they're trying to drag Cuba into this thing. Senator Rick Scott is out there saying Russia and China are supporting someone who kills children. Ever hear of a place called Waco, Texas, Senator? Now, Maduro is mocking Elliot Abrams, calling him the vice king of Venezuela. So the war of words is cranking up. Maduro slammed Abrams as an old hawk of the Cold War. which is certainly true. And, of course, Eric Prince has stepped on in with his latest Blackwater-inspired mercenary empire, saying, hey, we've got 5,000 mercenaries. We can get Maduro out of there for you. So we'll see what happens on that one. Over in the Persian Gulf, the Russian Navy and Iran are staging a joint drill. This is kind of an unusual event. It'll happen later this year. Rear Admiral Hossein Khanzadi made the announcement during a press conference yesterday upon return to Tehran from a high-profile visit to China, where he met with his counterparts with other countries. He said our negotiations with Russia revolved mostly around technical and operational topics, and we plan to hold a joint naval exercise. So this is expected to take their bilateral cooperation to a whole new level. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The U.S. government has just delivered 5 million rounds of ammunition to the Lebanese army. And this was just announced at the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, that they're giving them all this ammunition. We're not exactly sure why, but everybody's pouring the weapons on in there. And all it's going to take is one hothead to really crank things up. Okay. Then there's still Iran, and there's clearly a crisis that is building up in the oil-producing Gulf region. And if it gets out of control, it is in fact going to have negative impacts on the entire global economy. Now, the Trump administration has demanded that the principal importers of 1.2 billion barrels of Iranian oil halt purchases immediately, in fact, as of tomorrow. This imperial dictate includes China, South Korea, Turkey, India, and Japan. Now, this embargo is very close to an all-out act of war, because if you'll remember back in 1941, America's cutoff of oil to Japan provoked the attack on Pearl Harbor. Well, there were other provocations as well. FDR just goaded them. He wanted that attack to get the U.S. into the war against the Axis powers. But the oil embargo did not help. All right. Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani in Iran says that Iran no longer holds value for Europe's demands, as European governments have let it down in fighting hostile U.S. policies, pledging that the Islamic Republic will get even with the U.S. on its own. And all of a sudden, they're back to talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz again. And so Ali said, we are trying to find out why European leaders and the European Union only support us in rhetoric only to express regret at America's actions. Sure, you might say there are problems because of U.S. pressure, and it might sound logical, but we look at this from our own point of view, and most important thing for us is that this behavior has raised questions about the EU's credibility, and it means that the EU lacks the weight to solve problems. In other words, it's come on out and basically said the EU is a puppet of the United States, which is pretty much accurate. Story that came on out from Press TV, an American political analyst is saying the U.S. CENTCOM's chief has, through his recent antagonistic comments targeting Iran, been trying to drum up support among American neoconservatives and Islamophobes for war against the Islamic Republic. So Rodney Martin, he's a former congressional staffer based in Los Angeles, made the comments to Press TV on Sunday, a day after General Kenneth McKenzie said during a tour of the Persian Gulf region, the U.S. was to continue to reach out to our partners and friends in the region to ensure we make common cause against the threat of Iran. Doesn't look to me like Iran is the threat. Looks to me like the United States continues to be the belligerent and the threat in the region. Over in Syria, Iranian forces continue to remain 50 miles away from the border with Israel, despite Washington's statement that it recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And this is from Russian Special Presidential Envoy for Syria, Alexander Lavrentiev. He says, we have reached an agreement with our Iranian friends that certain units that have been there at the Syrian border with Israel in order to ensure security will be transferred to that safe distance from 75 to 80 kilometers. They have fulfilled their promises. Over in the West Bank, the Israeli government is going to start funding the construction of hotels. And apparently they think that being able to go and stay in the illegally occupied West Bank is now attractive to tourists. So Israel's tourism ministry will aid entrepreneurs who want to invest in building or expanding hotels in Judea and Samaria, which is what Israel calls the occupied West Bank. And the entrepreneurs can now apply for a grant of up to 20% of their intended investment. So the building continues over there in the West Bank on stolen land, stolen property. Now, the International Criminal Court finally, after all these years, is going to hold a public hearing to look into Israel's attack on the humanitarian aid flotilla, which included the ship the Mavi Marmara back in 2010. That's 9 years ago. That was the one where this one aid worker was lying on the deck on his back and simply shot in the head by one of the IDF. So 5 of the appeals chamber judges are going to attend the hearing, and adding that they would look into the public prosecutor's decision based on which no investigation was opened in the case. Earlier, the appeals chamber turned down an appeal made by the public prosecutor against the pretrial chamber, which requested the public prosecutor review her decision on closing the case without investigation. So they're going to take another look at that. And I can already hear Israel supporters out there screaming, "Oh, you anti-Semites, you Jew haters, how could you do this?" Okay, Fox News is running the banner headline, "Uprising in Venezuela." But again, looking at the actual videos, there just aren't that many people out there. They've got this one guy up there with a bullhorn. They're not getting the traction. They're not getting the traction. Okay. Over in Donetsk, the Ukrainian armed forces shelled the outskirts of the Donetsk water filtration plant in eastern Ukraine last Friday, prompting the evacuation of personnel. And apparently, Ukraine opened fire toward Yasinovataya. The zone of shelling included the outskirts of the Donetsk water filtration station. The Ukrainian troops continued mortar fire. Personnel have taken shelter. So they're going after the infrastructure. Over in Japan, it is sayonara for Emperor Akihito, who has stepped down from the throne. This is the first abdication of a Japanese emperor in 200 years. Now, Akihito is 85 years old, and he spent earlier today holding traditional private ceremonies at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, in which he symbolically announced his intention to abdicate to Amaterasu, who's the sun goddess. Well, the sun goddess is not going to be taking over. The throne is actually going to pass to Crown Prince Naruhito, who will ascend the chrysanthemum throne. This will take place tomorrow. Now, Akihito was the son of Hirohito, was Emperor of Japan during World War II. And one of the terms of surrender of Japan in World War II is they got to keep their emperor, who was seen as more of a spiritual head, definitely a ruler, but a spiritual head as well. Following the Japanese defeat in World War II, the emperor didn't really have any civil power, And Hirohito actually spent the rest of his life studying and researching in botany. A lot of people don't know about that one. Akihito was his son. Over in North Korea, their vice foreign minister said that the United States will face undesired consequences if it fails to present a new position in denuclearization talks by the end of the year. So they're willing to let this thing sort of drag on out. Kim Jong-un has set a year-end deadline for the U.S. to show more flexibility after his second summit with Trump failed to produce a deal to end Pyongyang's nuclear program in return for sanctions relief. So Trump and Mike Pompeo have brushed aside the deadline, calling for Kim to take action on his pledge to denuclearize after years of pursuing nuclear and rocket programs in defiance of UN Security Council resolutions. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call to Steve in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Yesterday I had a caller. I was co-hosting with John on his show, the National Intel Report, and a caller called in with something that kind of opened my eyes, and I just want to throw it by you. But he mentioned that the synagogues are heavily armed and they have surveillance cameras, and you just can't walk in the synagogue.
No, you can't.
And yeah, in my synagogue nearby me here, I kind of went by there the other day, and he's correct. There's surveillance cameras and there's guards out front, and you just can't walk in. So bringing that to my attention had me wondering about this whole thing, how it's just possible. This whole story just doesn't match. The kid doesn't fit the profile. It just doesn't mash out, Michael. It's just very odd and strange, and it's just not believable.
Well, it very well could be, another staged phony hate crime. Unfortunately, real people die in these things. And all I can say is I'm glad that Border Patrol agent was there with his service firearm to chase the guy off. But we know that Israel loves fake hate crimes. They've got this big stink about this other one where this Jewish couple vandalized their own business to say, oh, we're the victims of anti-Semitism. And it's epidemic all over the place.
Yeah, the timing of it, though, just weeks before they're pushing anti-Semitism, which I have never seen. I've never heard anybody walk around saying, I hate Jews and I want to hurt Jewish people. But they're just running up that theme of anti-Semitism. And then, of course, this happens. Of course, it's a hate crime. It's anti-Semitism all over again. And it just doesn't kind of mash out. It doesn't really work.
I agree.
I just doesn't. Like I said, this synagogue near me, I went over to, drove by the other day, and it is heavily armed, and it's been for a while, ever since the one in Pittsburgh. And there are surveillance cameras. So now I want to see is, let's see those surveillance cameras. Let's see this whole thing, how it laid out. That's what I want to see. I
would absolutely agree. And when the Department of Homeland Security is handing out security grants, Jewish institutions, synagogues and such, get the lion's share of them.
Right. That's it for me, Mike. Have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again. Over in Great Britain, the chief of GCHQ, Robert Hannigan, has stepped down or is about to step down for personal reasons, supposedly health issues involving his wife, which I can understand, and other family members. And Hannigan only took over the UK surveillance agency in November 2014 to oversee a more open approach after the revelations by Edward Snowden put GCHQ on the defensive in 2013. So his sudden resignation prompted speculation it might be related to British concerns over shared intelligence with the U.S. in the wake of Donald Trump becoming president. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and turning to our domestic politics here. As you know, Bernie Sanders has made a bit of a kerfuffle over his idea that criminals in prison should have a right to vote. Now, this varies from state to state to state, but normally the rule of thumb is if you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote. And a lot of people think that's common sense because, after all, do you want people who've been convicted of crimes like, well, murder, rape, child molestation. Do you want them voting for candidates who might be more sympathetic to their causes? And it turns out 75% of Americans disagree with Bernie Sanders. Polls are showing 3/4 of Americans do not think criminals in prison should have a right to vote. Of course, we know what's going on. The Democrats are just looking for any place they can harvest more votes for 2020. Illegal immigrants, people in prison, doesn't really matter. The argument over Deutsche Bank and the Trump financial records is heating up. Apparently, Trump and his children are now suing Deutsche Bank to prevent it from handing over their financial records to Congress. Now, Deutsche Bank is also cooperating with the New York's Democratic Attorney General's probe. The question is, do they really have a legal right to see those records? It's a fishing expedition. The Trump-Russia collusion blew up in their face. They're not willing to give up, so they're on a fishing expedition. All right, I'm looking at Fox News, and they've got the little headline there, tensions mounting in Venezuela. Guaido supporters clash with forces loyal to Maduro. And again, it's just not that big a crowd. Meanwhile, somebody just sent me an article from news reporters on the ground in Caracas showing the pro-Maduro crowd. It is considerably larger. I think this is going to fail. It's going to be as big a boondoggle as the Bay of Pigs here. Now, this is an interesting story, and you have to wonder why this long delay. It has to do with a gentleman named Samuel Bennett. He's 23 years old, and he was simply out for a jog when somebody shot and killed him near the Big 4 rail trail in Zionsville, Indiana. Police say that early Sunday morning before dawn, Bennett parked his car at Jennings Field, went for a run. A quarter mile in, somebody shot and killed him. Now, Bennett wasn't robbed. His wallet was still on him. His cell phone was still in his car. Bennett is the son of prominent Indianapolis attorney Jackie Bennett Jr. Now, Jackie Bennett Jr. was a federal prosecutor for 14 years. He served in the office of the independent counsel Kenneth Starr from 1995 to 1999, the last 2 years as the principal deputy in charge of the Office of the Independent Counsel's Washington, D.C. operations. Jackie supervised the day-to-day operations of that office and was involved in a number of high-profile investigations and prosecutions. He served as a senior advisor to Judge Starr on investigation, including the impeachment referral of William Jefferson Clinton. In that regard, he was one of 3 prosecutors selected by Judge Starr to conduct the grand jury questioning of President Clinton. Now, if this was something that happened just a little while ago, I'd say, okay, candidate for the dead bodies list. But this long afterwards, I wouldn't think the Clintons would be this big on a long-delayed revenge. But you never really can tell. When somebody gets gunned down and they still have their wallet and their cell phone, that's a hit. That's definitely a hit. Over at the southern border, the FBI is now investigating Antifa for a plan to buy guns from Mexican drug cartels to stage an armed rebellion at the southern border. And the FBI is warning of militant Antifa activists planning to disrupt security operations at the U.S.-Mexico border. Pardon me. The group allegedly planned to buy guns from a Mexican cartel associate known as Cobra Commander in order to stage this armed rebellion. Well, it looks to me like Antifa, if anybody, should be designated a domestic terrorist group. And finally, the latest poll from Rasmussen, 78% of Americans think journalists are political hacks. Only 14% believe they accurately represent events. So we're going to take another another pause here for some commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, talking about the economic news here. There is an international audit firm that says Russia has successfully managed to decrease the use of the U.S. dollar in its settlement with its foreign trade partners, significantly increasing the number of deals with in Russian rubles and the euro. So Elena Trubnikova, chairwoman of the board of Finns Expertisa, said tendency towards doing away with the U.S. dollar on foreign trade is obvious. This is the way to a more stable economy and protection of it against sanctions. This is mostly true for exports, as selling the goods for the national currency of the exporter is a natural order of things. So according to research conducted by the Moscow-based consultancy network, the share of settlements in Russia's foreign trade using the U.S. currency have been reduced by 12.6% between 2013, before Russian sanctions were introduced against Russia, through 2018. So bit by bit, they are definitely moving away. Okay. Over at the White House, Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is saying that the China trade talks will be resolved one way or another within 2 weeks. So they keep flipping back and forth. Yesterday, Trump was saying he's getting ready to walk away from the table. Well, this is good news. I wish they'd sort this whole mess out. All righty. So the White House has been pushing for a deal to revamp its trade relationship with China and address concerns about trade deficits, intellectual property theft, and I agree that's a big one, and forced technology transfers. Okay. Lord Rothschild has announced plans to stand down after more than 3 decades as chairman of RIT Capital Partners. He's 82 years old, and he insisted yesterday he will continue to play an ongoing and active role at the $3.2 billion investment trust when he assumes the new role of president in September. Now, his family's 21% stake is worth about £672 million. It's a lot of money. Okay. Ukraine is still relying heavily on Russian gas. Therefore, it won't be able to use reverse flows if the gas... Okay, we just lost our connection, and I don't know exactly what happened, but we're back up and running. Okay, so getting on back to the news, we were talking about Ukraine, and it's still relying heavily on Russian gas. It's not paying for it all, and there had been talk of trying to reverse the gas flow so that Ukraine could get gas from Europe. And Putin is saying if there's no transit, there are no gas supplies. And basically saying that if the transit of Russian gas through Ukraine stops, there will be no reverse. So apparently the story was that Ukraine was sending the gas on through to Europe and then pumping some of it back for its own use. And Putin is saying that's not appropriate. Here in the United States, over in Wisconsin, dairy farmers are going bankrupt in record numbers. And there's a variety of factors, but most of them are blaming the Trump tariffs. So, I mean, this whole thing with sanctions and tariffs, Trump is doing it without regard to who it's going to hurt. Anyway, over in Manhattan along Billionaires Row, where homes can go for as high as $238 million. The residents are outraged because Manhattan has approved the construction of a homeless shelter right there on Billionaires Row. And all of a sudden, all these billionaires, many of whom are liberal, are out there doing that whole NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. Fox News is reporting that Trump has ordered a sweeping asylum overhaul, including a new fee for applicants, faster adjudications, and I like this last one, barring them from working in the U.S. in the meantime. One of the things I have found very, very upsetting is under the so-called catch and release program that we have seen so many, they're handed a work card. They sneak across the border, they apply for asylum, they're given a work card, and they're sent on into this country, into a country where we have almost 100 million legal American citizens who cannot find a job. Okay. The other problem out there is Border Patrol is releasing thousands of illegal immigrants who have been exposed to diseases like tuberculosis. Now, in the heyday of American immigration, Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, the immigrants who were coming in the legal way had to go through an incubation period at quarantine stations. In fact, if you look at the history of Ellis Island, a lot of those buildings are a lot of those buildings are quarantine stations, and people would have to stay there to make sure they weren't holding some kind of a disease. Today, it's different. They just come across the border carrying contagious health conditions like chickenpox, scabies, tuberculosis, lice, and of course measles. Even the CDC is saying the illegal immigrants are the source of the measles outbreaks here in the United States. It's not the American children, and it's not the people who don't like vaccines. It's the illegal immigrants. This is more than just an immigration crisis. This is a health crisis. The Pentagon has now approved $7.4 million for troops to feed and care for the border crosses. These border crossers are getting better treatment from the U.S. government than our homeless veterans. It's just insane. It's just absolutely, absolutely insane. Okay, over in Sweden, and this gets back to something I was talking about yesterday about where is all this religious hatred coming from. But apparently in Sweden, Christian migrants repeatedly have been attacked by Muslim migrants to the point where they fear a civil war could break out in the country. And yes, there is that potential, because the Muslims have been pouring on in. They're blending on in. They're getting angry. They're getting hostile. They're being stirred up. And yeah, we could see literally religious war break out all across Europe and here in the United States. Okay, we're going to take a phone call now from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You stated a few minutes ago that 100 million American citizens couldn't find jobs. What do you base that on?
Believe it or not, that was a report that came out from CNN. If you go over to the Department of Labor Statistics or the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you look at the work participation rate, you'll see the numbers are definitely backed up. How they get from that down to this, single-digit unemployment is if you've been out of work for longer than a certain interval of time, you're recategorized as chronically unemployable, and you're no longer included in the calculation for the unemployment rate. They're cooking the books, in other words.
Yeah, that unemployment rate, I think it's 10 weeks, isn't it?
It's something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have similar figures up here in Canada, although they say our participation rate is higher. But in Canada, it's based upon, I think, from 15 years old to 70 or 65 or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's, I don't actually think it's an accurate number either.
Well, it's certainly not the number that corporate media is feeding us. But until we have every single American who wants a job having a job, we shouldn't be opening that border to anybody new.
Well, I agree. I agree with you. But do you honestly think that that kind of expectation is possible?
Well, I think there's room for improvement.
Yeah. You know, I don't see it happening, Mike. You know, I work in I'm a millwright, and I just don't see that sort of thing happening any longer. You know, look at you have farmers in your country going out of business.
Yes.
So, you know, and like you said, a few shows ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, about the flooding, it's going to have a really huge, major impact on food.
Yes,
like,
it
people
is.
think $6 for celery is outrageous now in Canada.
You know, plus you've got that problem with the swine flu has wiped out, you know, a huge part of China's pork crop. Yeah, it's a mess. Pacific Ocean fish are contaminated, Gulf of Mexico fish are contaminated, and it's this huge problem, and nobody in the government seems to want to look at it.
Well, because it's so huge, and they know they can't fix it.
Yeah, that's
you
it.
know, some of these farmers that have like large swaths of land, like let's say 300 or 400 acres, you know, they could, if they were allowed to, dig a big pond and stock it with fish and start their own fish farm. But the problem is the groundwater is so polluted, and you know, all of that fertilizer and what's the word? Glyphosate, all
Yes.
this nonsense that has been leaching into the ground for the last 30, 40, 50 years. You can't even do that unless you were to line the pond. So what's next?
Yeah, it's a mess. The farms were not well managed. Everybody just got out there with their latest, greatest whiz bang, you know, in terms of chemicals and fertilizers and so forth. And yeah, they depleted the topsoil of nutrients. They tried to make up for it you know, with new chemicals, and it's just getting you know, it's getting worse and worse.
Oh, but yeah, we're and it's nothing. It's nothing that people talk about, which is, you know, our food supply and where it's grown and how it's grown. I'm not even talking about animals, just, you know, vegetables, grains. We're in serious trouble.
Yeah, we are.
Very serious trouble. And greenhouses ain't going to bail us out because they're nutrient deficient, as
Yes.
you probably already know.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, big time. And where they're going to skip money in greenhouses is actually adding nutrients to the water. That's where they're going to skimp to begin with, right?
Yes.
So we're in serious trouble unless we can get this, you know, under some kind of reign. I don't see a lot of hope for humanity in the future. This 7 or 8 billion, we're approaching 8 billion people.
Yep.
It's not good. And,
No.
and you know, they think the IMF can loan a few dollars here and there out of thin air and help everybody. What they don't tell you is the inflation rate of actually doing something like that.
Well, what they don't tell you is there comes a point where all of that paper money, you can't find what you need to buy to fix the problems. Anyway, Al, got to take a break for commercials.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, a couple of things. You've kind of been bouncing around even while you were on technical hiatus there for a minute. You got onto the Chinese stuff, and I thought I'd pick your brain a little bit because, I mean, I know what my cynical suspicion is. Why are we, you know, when Chinese pork prices are suffering from all the swine flu, African swine flu, a 34% jump in imports or something. And we don't know how many pigs has been lost with all this El Nino Baja Express coming through and flooding everything. And there's more this week soaking the heartland. There's hashtags for the farmers, no plant 19, I think.
Yep.
A bunch of them are declaring that they're not going to plant anything. Why are we importing swine from China? 1 million pounds of it had to be destroyed in New Jersey a week or two ago because it was contaminated. I mean, is it just simply a way to try to doctor the books for trade imbalance and collect tariffs? I mean, it has to be government revenue generating or justifying the port activity. I mean, I don't understand that. We're exporting and importing at the same time. Same stuff.
Yeah, I understand it, and it can get a little bit confusing, but again, it may have to do with different kinds of pigs, and just the fact that it may be easier to import and export to just sort of optimize shipping routes. But
I don't know. It don't make sense to me.
I don't know.
Come into New Jersey, to come into New Jersey, it has to go through probably the Panama Canal, which is suffering from drought and has this shallow draft the boats.
Yes.
It's already down 15 million, or I can't remember what it is. There's several dozen million maybe that they're down in revenue for both tourism and shipping because their water levels are low in that lake you have to travel across. So, it really doesn't make sense that we're risking the contamination of our country with their swine flu at the same time we're exporting it. I talked to Rand Paul up in a place called Vanceburg, Kentucky, when he was on a campaign trail, and I've got it on video. A bunch of people in the audience were asking him about, the war on coal here in eastern Kentucky, and he just threw it out there that, because I told him, I said, how can you say we're having a war on coal when there's 4 times more coal going to China than the entire state of West Virginia out of the Powder River Basin out west? And he goes, well, we're importing coal. There absolutely is a war on coal, but we're importing coal, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, how cheap are those people working, if we're importing coal?
Well, in the case of the coal, it may have to do with how much sulfur is in the coal, because some countries, there are no restrictions on the sulfur content of coal. On other countries, there are. Do you remember the whole big stink about the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument that Bill Clinton declared? And it was up in the state of Utah, and it basically locked away from the American people one of our best domestic sources for low sulfur coal, and forced American companies to start buying and importing coal from sources in Indonesia, which just happened to be campaign contributors to the Clinton campaign. Anyway, listen, hang on to the line. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back with hour number 2. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're talking with Mike out of Kentucky, and we're talking about importing and exporting more or less the same product to China. Now, I don't know what U.S. pork exports are. I do know that prior to this swine flu problem, China was the world's largest exporter of pork products. And again, it may have to do with something that is in the pigs, just with the coal. Some countries are okay with high sulfur coal, other countries are not. Maybe American pork is loaded up with all kinds of chemicals and the Chinese is not, or it could be the other way around. So there could be a wide variety of factors.
Well, and then there's the money and the investments and the campaign contributions, and
yes.
Just like with the FCC and whatever else, various agencies and sectors of our government are been taken over or captured, as the Harvard Ethics Department calls it, by the industries that they're supposed to be regulating, or syndicates, I'd rather call them.
Yes.
But and if anybody's got an extra 900,000, I guess due to inflation, maybe $1 million, I could buy me the FCC chairmanship under who gets elected next time, and I could fix some of this stuff that's going on. I think that's what Sam Wheeler supposedly paid Obama to get the FCC chairman seat.
Yep.
But in any event, he's a longtime lobbyist, and he's probably back at it. But the swine, or not the swine flu, but the vaccine issue with the measles, I just stumbled across a diagram which looks in concept very, very similar to what goes on with antibiotics, and it looks like there's two main mechanisms that makes vaccines less effective, maybe even ineffective over time.
Yes.
So they have to be redone every so often due to the antigens, the protein features of the diseases changing either through natural mutations or even vaccine-driven changes in the disease. Our own Kentucky governor here was berated by the Associated Press for almost a week. They made sure everybody that had an AP Newswire feed saw the story by double posting it, that he had done in a radio interview where he talked about getting his children exposed, and he had adopted children as well, to a friend's household that had chicken pox. And I never did, find out, and I don't think the Associated Press and their sin by omission did not go through and say, hey, none of his children got it, or they, must have been immune, or some of them got chicken pox from that. But healthy people, just with chicken pox and the measles, if you're fairly healthy, it's not going to be a big deal. I had the mumps as a youngster. If you get mumps as a man, you can become sterile. And so you can get shingles, but then at the same time, during this whole story, I kept seeing over and over again these commercials, the whatever brand of vaccine it is for shingles, called Dewey, Cheatham and Howe, the law firm, can help you with if you got shingles from the Zostavax vaccine or whatever brand it is. So at the same time, I just found out about a woman who confronted her doctor over this. There are apparently the free vaccines that most everybody is told to accept may still be coming out of up to 50-year shelf life, big brown mass dose vials, and they can advertise in recent years, oh, there's no more mercury in the MMR shot, but yet they're still using these old 50-year shelf life brown mass dose jugs, and their doctor could not believe it because they had left their pediatrician that was going to give them this, just a few short years ago. I think this has been 2 or 3 years ago they told me this. And so people need to really find out, because not only are you going to risk getting the mercury, but how old is that dang vaccine? It's not been redesigned for the new antigens. It's going to be less effective.
Yes.
It's a double whammy. It's a double whammy, triple whammy, I guess. All the risk, none of the benefit. And I don't necessarily believe that all of them are that way, but I think we deserve to be informed. And I've heard also that parents that ask to see the insert materials, I want to see the package insert on this vaccine, that they're blown off and told, well, you won't understand it and it's just going to scare you. You don't need to read that. But so much for informed consent. There is no contract there. Not a contract.
You're absolutely right. If the parents are not being allowed to inform themselves, then they can't give informed consent. But again, it's all driven by the money, because if they take those 50-year-old mass jugs and throw them in the trash, that's a write-off. And if they donate them, if you will, to a public vaccination program, then they get the tax write-off.
Well, with our own youngster, it's been at least, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago, and I don't know how they get your name and all this, but we started getting parenting magazines in the mail before we told our family that, we were going to have a baby. And in those parenting magazines, they advertised what they were calling at the time, and this has been a decade ago, I guess, low E vaccines that have less adjuvants, which includes aluminum.
Yeah.
And I guess back in the day had squalene and other junk in the shots. There's a book out called What Your Doctor Will Not Tell You About Vaccines, and we went by that because we got our youngster some of the most crucial vaccines. But the more we found out about them, the more we said, this is hypocritical. How can we be pro-life and inject aborted fetal tissues into our child? So he never got the MMR, just like these Jews up in New York were essentially de Blasio, and I've never found an actual reporter quote him directly. That Mike Adams is saying that he said something in quotes that we own your bodies and we will inject whatever we want to in your bodies, referring to these Jews that will not take the shot because it has the human diploid cells from an aborted baby black girl in the 70s or something. It's a cloned stem cell line that they use in a lot of this research, including flavor research for Pepsi and Gatorade. Apparently, that's not a myth, even though Snopes tries to say it is. But the thing I was getting at is that you can't even order the vaccines that are advertised and marketed to parents. You go to try to order them, and you go to the clinic's procurement officer, and you say, look, I'll order a case. I'll order a case of 6, and just so I can have one for my child. And they're like, no, you have to take the shot that's given. You have to take these big brown jug shots that, with the 50-year shelf life, who knows how old they are, and if they've been frozen or not. That's another thing, is these refrigerators that these things are stored in over the holiday weekend can freeze the vaccine if it's not very temperature controlled, and the crystals forming in there destroys the vaccine effectiveness. So there's just one thing after another that you have to wonder about when you buy into the idea that vaccines are your, quote, social responsibility. That's what one doctor told here locally. You have to take the shots as given. We're not going to order you this better vaccine or safer vaccine. You have to go to Cuba or California if you want that.
Yeah, it is. It's such a racket. Anyway, listen, Mike, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Back to the phones to Sebastian in Sweden. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Mike. How's your leg?
Doing much better.
Okay, because I had a fall like that 3 years ago. I was 68, and it takes a while, but you get back.
Yes.
I was just going to call to tell you about these Christians in Sweden. It's about 100 to 150, and they call it Syrians. And what they are, they're from Syria. It's a Christian group from Syria, Iraq, Iran, and the Kurdistan. It's like a religious group, a Christian religious group, and they were the ones who were harassed by the new immigrants here in Sweden.
Okay.
And they called the police, and the police said that no, we can't help you. It's only a threat, and they've been threatened several times, and verbally, confronted, plus via telephone. And they told the police, well, if you can't help us, we'll form our own police. So it's really getting, things could get really hot here.
It seems to be getting hot everywhere. And as I mentioned, I think it was last week, it almost feels like somebody somewhere is deliberately trying to fan up all this religious tension.
It could be. But I remember they've been here. I came here in 70, and they were here long before, maybe 10, 15 years before I came. They have a huge church in a city south of Stockholm called Södertälje. And they're really nice people. I've known a few, and, they have weddings, and I was invited to a wedding, and it reminds me of the wedding that was in the movie Deer Hunter, if you think of that. It's sort of a Orthodox type Christian,
Okay.
It was pretty good. And another news, I don't know if you know about it yet, but there are 2 members of the feminist activist group, Pussy Riot from Russia, that's got political asylum here in Sweden now.
Okay.
They just got it. I just saw it today. And the government in Sweden has been so, like most Europeans, like America, has been so anti-Russian. And even the parties, almost all the political parties in Sweden are anti-Russian. Unfortunately, even the party I vote for.
Yes.
And it's a shame, but that's the way it is here. And someone called you, I think it was yesterday or the day before, And I was talking about Russia, and I've been there 3 times, and the people are great. I mean, okay, the government could be. I've been there 72, 81, and 2001. That was 10 days after 9/11. I had a working visa there, and the people are just wonderful. In every time I went there, it was the people. The people are just like Americans.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when I was there in Moscow in '81, people were eating ice cream, and my wife said, "Yeah, it's so cold. It's like -30. They're eating ice cream. Let's get some." So I got some, and it reminded me of the ice cream that I had in the '50s in America before all the chemicals came in. You know,
Yes.
like it tastes like homemade ice cream. But it's it's shame. You know, it's that's the way it is.
Well, I remember
Okay,
actually
Mike, have a
making
nice
our own
show,
ice
and-
cream when I was a kid. Big old wooden bucket with the crank on it.
Yeah, with the crank, you had to crank it up. I remember that in the summertime. You crank it a while. You know, I since I cranked it a while, and yeah, that was pretty. That was good times. Okay, thank you very much, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Mark in Montana. Mark, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Michael. How you doing today?
Doing fine.
Awesome. I wanted to talk about unemployment because I don't understand why there should be any unemployment in this country. I leave Montana. I think I said it before, and I come down here to West Texas, and every company is hiring multiple. I just hired 4 guys. I'm paying them an average of $30 an hour. They're getting 70 hours a week with a benefits package and a per diem, which is just basically free reimbursement money every day. And every place down here is hiring. The local, they're now DKs. They used to be 7-Elevens, but the DKs are hiring cashiers. They're paying them $17 an hour, and they're giving them overtime. Everything's like that here. And I know this is not indicative of everywhere in the country, but if you can't make it where you're at, maybe you ought to consider packing your crap up and going somewhere where there is work. You know what
Yes.
I'm saying? I mean, it's here, guys. It's here. If you get on some of the West Texas employment sites, you'd be shocked at what they're paying. If you have a truck driving license, a CDL, and you're willing to haul crude oil or haul a flatbed full of pipe, you know, a lot of these companies are paying you $30 an hour, and they're giving $5,000 sign-in bonuses after 90 days, plus a full benefits package, plus a lot of them have housing, and they're running rotational. So if you want to come down here and work 3 weeks, then you can go home for a week. I mean, it's here. And, if you own a camper trailer, you're especially valuable because you can park your camper trailer. That's the problem here is the housing. We have a real lack of affordable housing. But, I highly recommend folks, if they want, they can get a hold of me on Facebook. I'm Mark Montana on Facebook, and I will send them links to stuff. I have no axe to grind. I got all my guys filled now finally, but I'm paying my winch truck drivers $32 an hour, and they get a housing bonus, a housing benefit. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The Dollar Generals, you go in and they got one cashier and that's it because they can't find anybody, and there is such a labor shortage out here that to stand still too long, they'll Shanghai you off the street. So, folks, if you don't have a job, contact me on Facebook and I will help you find a job. You might have to relocate or work a rotational, but it's definitely here, and it's everything. If you have a little bit of petroleum experience, that's great. If you're willing to deliver parts for the local parts house, that's even better. If you're a salesman, I mean, it's all here, everything, cashiers, servers. They got high school kids at Dairy Queen making $17 an hour. It's crazy.
Well, it's good that you're living in a part of the country that is definitely being prosperous, but I think where we're seeing the unemployment most are in the big cities like New York, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, and so forth. Silicon Valley, there's a lot of money up there, but there's also a lot of unemployment. And part of it has to do with the increasing trend toward automation. And again, offshoring has been a real problem. But if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and you look at the total labor participation rate, you begin to understand that we really have no business allowing illegal immigrants to walk across our border and give them work permits. And by the way,
Yeah,
you know that horrible truck accident out in Colorado, apparently involved in illegal with falsified documents, including a CDL.
Yeah, and we deal with that out here in the oil field. It's there's one little strip of highway there. It's 285 north of Pecos, Texas. And at one point, because I'm a safety guy, I was keeping stats on it. They were averaging 4 fatalities a week on that one little strip of road. You know, I mean, and it's mostly trucks. And unfortunately, we take Mexican drivers with a Mexican driver's license. And, you know, Mexico's a corrupt place. You can go in and for a few bucks, you can get you a driver's license and an ID card. And, you know, that's unfortunately what's happening with a lot of it here because there's such a labor shortage. And I agree with you, but I will also say, you know, I go once a month to New York City because I have a girlfriend that lives on Long Island. And New York City is booming. They're building, I don't know how many skyscrapers there. Her brother's an electrician that pulls wire, and they can't find people that want to pull wire. I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to sound like a bigoted SOB, but I think there's a lot of people that don't want to work. You know, it's a whole lot easier to sit and draw some kind of a government check and not work and play Nintendo than it is to come out here.
I would agree with you. That is a big part of the problem. And unfortunately, that's an image that's been sold to a segment of the population by the liberal Democrats.
Right.
You know, that you have been wronged, your ancestors were wronged, and we're going to give you free stuff. And
I got... Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
And, you know, these guys that come out here, I got 19, 20-year-old kids that work for me as just what we call a swamper, which is a general laborer. And they're making 6 figures, man. And they don't have to have a degree. They don't have to, you know, go to school and be a lawyer or an attorney. They can come out here and make that kind of money. And if they save it and they're frugal with it, when the oil field collapses, and it will eventually, we all know that, they'll have enough money they can go to college and coast for quite a while. Or maybe they want to go and become a welder or, you know, learn a trade, which I highly recommend young guys do or young gals do, is go learn those trades because that's, you know, everybody's going to need plumbers and everybody's going to need, you know, electricians.
I agree.
You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money, you know. We've become a society where we value a freaking degree over a work ethic and a skill. You know, you get a degree in creative feminist dance, you're no good to nobody. But if you learn to, you know, weld or plumb or do electricity, you're valuable.
Agreed. Okay.
Okay, Mark Montana on Facebook. Look me up, and I'll help you the best I can if anybody wants it.
Okay, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and got an interesting little email. What the caller from Canada said about old shelved vaccine back inventory stock is true. There is also a huge thing with the food distribution system, albeit on a shorter time scale. The freshest produce, meats, and drinks first go to the largest, highest volume grocery stores like Stater Brothers. If they don't sell within a set period, they get shipped back out and end up at second-tier food beverage retailers such as Walmarts and Targets that also sell groceries on the side. If the items fail to sell there, they will be demoted again, often to food, beverage, afterthought retailers like mini-marts, CVS pharmacies, 7-Elevens, and liquor stores. Bananas make for a great tell when it comes to this practice. The ones in big Tier 1 grocery stores are usually yellow, green, and spotless, while the ones your local 7-Eleven sells are always beginning to show brown spots here. And I'm not sure about the Walmart. The few times I've been in there, the produce looked like it was decent. Of course, they spray the produce now with glyphosate as a preservative. But I do know that at the local CVS pharmacy, in what passes for a grocery section there, it's nasty over there. All right, let's go back to the phone lines. Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for taking my call. It's not often that I recommend you go to the prostitutes and get information. But on Sunday the 28th, 60 Minutes had two segments on there that are worth your attention. The first one concerned the southern border.
Yes.
And the gal there that was doing the interview was interviewing the current head of Homeland Security. I think a guy by the name of Kevin McAleenan or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was from the Obama administration, and he's in charge of the southern border. And they showed these so-called migrant families coming in droves. And because they cannot, adjudicate them immediately, okay, and see if they are true asylum seekers, and they should be sent back right away, they are, registered, and then they have 2 to 5 year wait to find out if they can come into the country under the asylum protection. But in the meantime, you will see them placed on buses and sent wherever throughout the country. And last month it was 100,000 of these people. Now this is, President Trump saying we've got to stop this, but yet he's got an Obama official in there that's doing this. Now, in the same vein, there was a show on PBS, it's called Firing Line with Margaret Hoover, and she's interviewed some interesting people. One of the gals that she interviewed was Ann Coulter.
Yes.
And Ann Coulter pointed out that she's had it up to the eyeballs with Trump, that he's not delivering on his message and he's betraying the base. So Margaret Hoover says, well, what should he be doing? He should be appointing James Kovach, who was a candidate for governor in Kansas. Kovach was the Secretary of State there, and he uncovered vote fraud, as I think I pointed out, up in New Hampshire, and then Trump shut that down. So
okay, Bill, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Don't hang up. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. I'm sorry, my mistake. I misread the clock here. Bill, you got about another 45 seconds.
Okay, I'll make it quick then. So what we have is a false situation of Trump saying, I'm trying to do something. He's doing something, all right. He's sinking the country. The second interview that was done on 60 Minutes showed the fentanyl coming into the country, and, they had a little bit of it spread out on a table. It's enough to kill the entire city of Cleveland, Ohio. I don't want to give these characters any ideas, but I'm wondering when they're going to start dumping it in water supplies.
Well, again, we are giving them bad ideas. All right, Bill, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We've got more callers waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right back to the phone lines. Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, a few things. Good afternoon to you. For the first caller in Sweden, I would like to say he's absolutely right about the ice cream back in the 60s. It tastes a lot better than it does now. You eat a couple of 3 or 4 gallons of that ice cream in a month's time, now you're going to get diabetes. And the second caller you had from Montana was in Texas. I'd like to say something to him real quickly. I wonder how many Americans are actually working on the highways in Texas. I know here in Florida we have none. I don't see no white Americans. It looks like it's all from third world countries that are doing all the highway construction. And that's what I wanted to leave him with, that thought. In the block trade in California, you speak predominantly in L.A. and all the Southern California areas, predominantly white Anglos doing the block trade. Well, after 1999, it was all Hispanic, basically. Now, your last caller, Bill, I want to leave him with a thought. Bill, I don't know if you've been following what's going on with the Pope, but I believe the Pope is the one that's allowing this invasion of all these illegals to come to North America instead of going to Argentina. Now, the Pope and the Catholic Church is funding all this. They're funding this beast train and all that for them to come up north to North America where they don't speak English, but they should be going on to Argentina, Chile, and all those other Central and South American countries. And there's a big scam going on with the Catholic Church as far as I can see with this, which is evil because they're bringing these people who don't speak English into our country. And another thing, Michael, I remember a couple of weeks ago maybe a couple of months ago, I was talking about Venezuela. Well, Venezuela is erupting. We have people here in South Florida, these politicians, Rubio included, that say, well, we need to do a military intervention. Well, you know what, Michael? They'll say, I don't know what's going to happen with this, but Argentina is ready to explode. It's it's exploding right now, actually, as we speak. But you got politicians here in South Florida say, oh, we need military intervention. Well, no, I say we stay out of it and let them handle it, just like Cuba. I don't think me and you agree on this. We don't need to militarily intervene in that situation.
Well,
now,
Tom, the U.S. has already intervened. I mean, they're the ones who set up Guido and got him positioned and back. If the U.S. wasn't meddling in Venezuela, there wouldn't be any clash or explosive situation. This is a classic U.S. government regime change operation. Get the people riled up, get them set one against the other, turn them against the government, and bring the government down.
I agree you're right with you, Michael. But I want your opinion on this. I would like to hear your opinion about the Catholic Church and the Pope literally financing this illegal invasion of our country. I would like to hear your opinion on that. But before you do, though, Michael, I want to say one more thing. I was in the hospital. I just got out of the hospital, and I can tell you this, Michael, in all the hospitals here in South Florida, half the people that run these floors, these nurses and stuff, they don't even speak English, barely. I don't know how they get these jobs, but I can tell you this, Michael. In Cuba, you know how much a doctor makes a year? Cuba, a surgeon.
It's not much.
You want to take a guess? They make $1,600 a year, Michael. The foot surgeon or anybody who does any kind of surgery in Cuba makes $1,600 in American money. Now, if they were to come to Florida, where they're all trying to get here to, these people would make it. They'd be living in Golden Beach up there in North Florida, and they'd be making $400,000 or $500,000 a year. You understand what's going on here?
Yes.
This is an invasion because it's all like you always say. It's about the money. Follow the money. What do you think the Pope's doing? The Pope's telling all these people, come to North America for what? Because why, Michael? Because I'll tell you what I think. I mean, I think you may agree with this. They want to take over this country to speak in Spanish because English pretty soon will be a second-rate language here.
Yes.
If this continues.
There are places in this country where that's already the case.
Why is that Pope, why is that Argentinian Pope telling these people from Central America and South America to come here? Why don't they go to his country? Why don't you send all these people, turn them around and go to Argentina? Trump.
I think the Pope is. I think the Pope is on board with the globalist agenda of trying to just blur everything together. And again, that means the Spanish and English-speaking populations. As far as my reaction to it, I don't think it's really any of his business. If he's got $500,000 lying around that he can play around with like that, I would suggest maybe compensating some of those surviving abused children. But the Pope's business is the Catholic Church. And this Pope, though, he's getting involved in globalism. He's getting involved in immigration. He's getting involved in... Michael,
I got a thought for you.
Yeah.
Why is it the Catholic Pope give these angel mothers and fathers who got their children murdered by illegal aliens money? Why is he giving $1 billion out of Vatican to these people, angel mothers and fathers, who had, like Kate Steinle, all these people who've been murdered by illegal aliens who are supposed to be here? Why is the Catholic Church donating money to them people? Why is the federal government giving those people money? Because their families have been murdered, never to be brought back to this earth by illegal aliens, which is an illegal incursion and it's breaking every law you can think of. Now, I like to say this too, Michael. On Venezuela, you know what? Bill was talking about Ann Coulter. Well, Bernie Sanders she's going to back Bernie Sanders. He wants to be like Venezuela. So who's Ann Coulter? Ann Coulter's full of crap. Trump's blowing a lot of smoke maybe too. At least he's out there saying something that's going on. No president in my lifetime ever said we were being invaded. And there's an invasion. We need a wall. So, yeah, Trump, he's not doing enough. I totally agree on that with Bill. But you know what? He's at least saying something at his rallies where none of these other – you want a Bernie Sanders? You want a Joe Biden? This guy Biden – Michael, here's your opinion I want you to give your audience and to me. I want to know what's going to happen if Joe Biden has to go out there and say, we got to give reparations to all the slaves in the past. What's going to happen with that situation, Michael?
I think reparations is going to play very well to the Democrats, but I think most Americans are basically going to say it's a ridiculous idea. But again, the Democrats are pandering because they don't have any real ideas to run on.
Michael, can I say this to you? I'd like you to tell your audience this. And I know one gentleman is going to probably call you later, but I want to ask you this, Michael, because you've talked about this in the past. Who were the biggest slave owners in 1865 in this country? Who were they? You remember who they were?
Yes.
And what nationality were they, Michael?
You tell us.
They were Afro-American slave owners. They were Africans. Yep. The biggest slave owners in this country were Africans. They weren't white men. Is that correct, Michael?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct here. I mean, you've got this image from Roots of these white slavers walking onto the shore in Africa and just capturing black people to throw on a ship. It didn't work that way. The black Africans who were enslaved by other Africans and then sold to the slave traders.
And the biggest plantation owners in 1865, before Lincoln was assassinated, before the war ended, were African Americans. Am I right, Michael?
I'd have to go back and look at that. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the antebellum South when I was working on the Mississippi Queen, and most of the history we saw there was that the plantations themselves were owned predominantly by, white Southern Democrats.
There were the two biggest owners of Mississippi in that area were African Americans. They sure were. You can check it out. You can tell your audience when you find out the research. Getting back to Bill's point on immigration, though. This immigration that's happening in this country is appalling.
Yes.
And, maybe there's an Obama holdover. Trump should fire that guy immediately, put Kohlbacker in there. Absolutely correct on that, Bill. But I tell you right now, if we do not stop this illegal invasion of this country, we will end up being like Venezuela. We will be like Bosnia-Herzegovina. We will be like what Clinton was doing with Yugoslavia or whatever that is, Croatia back in the day.
Yes.
Remember that situation?
Yep.
That's going to happen right here, and it's already happening.
It is already happening.
I'll tell you that, Michael. It's already happening here. It's already happening. Matter of fact, like I said, when you're in the hospitals here in Florida, they don't even want to, if they don't have to, they're not going to speak English first. Their language is Spanish. Absolutely. And that's got to stop. The Italians are not allowed to keep Italian. The Germans were not allowed to keep Germans. The Poles, the Swedes, the Danes, any of those cultures that came here and Ellis Island, they had to become an American under Teddy Roosevelt's ideology. You become an English-speaking person or get out. Big softly, Terry. That was Teddy Roosevelt. He used that in his. I read his papers.
No, we've had that quote about this country. That's fine, but just understand we have one language, English. We have one government, the American government. We have one flag, the American flag, you will integrate with our society.
Michael, Teddy Roosevelt was a Rough Rider. He came to Tampa, Florida, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Tampa, Florida is actually.
I'm very familiar with it.
Cuba,
my grandfather was one of the Rough Riders.
Right. Awesome. That's awesome. That's something to be very proud of. And, Teddy Roosevelt went to Cuba, and he's the one to help, get Spain out of there. And look at how Cuba turned out. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the people were so stupid because, Michael, I can tell you, I've been to Cuba numerous times. I can tell you all about Cuba. I can tell you all about the ideas. I can tell you all the way how it went back even to Queen Isabella. Tell you the truth. But, when I went into churches in Cuba, I freaked out because I saw all these guys with long hair, and they have most of the men painted in these glaciers, they call them, are redheads. So I don't want to hear nothing about it. I don't know about Cuba because I know quite a bit. Matter of fact, you go to some towns in Cuba, you would freak out what you see because you never hear about it. But a lot of people in Cuba are redheads. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar with that.
From the old Spanish. Yes, a lot of redheads over there. I was like, wow, all these redheaded people. But it was a wake up call for what I through history what I saw there, and how beautiful some of the architect was, but they just let it crumble to the ground. I mean, Havana's just crumbling, Michael. It's very sad.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And, like I said, Castro didn't give them a revolution. He gave them a revolution. The place is in rubble. Okay? That's all I got to say.
It wasn't entirely his fault. Don't forget, once Castro kicked out Batista, the U.S. basically embargoed the place and just locked it off. And apparently
You're
Trump...
right, Michael. You're absolutely right.
Trump is getting ready to do it again. Apparently, he
Right.
just issued a statement that unless Cuban personnel cease all operations in Venezuela, I'm not sure exactly what that means, Trump is going to threaten Cuba with an embargo, which is kind of weird because I thought we were already hitting Cuba with an embargo.
Yes. Michael, one more thing. You had a call from Sweden. I have a friend. I talked to him a couple days ago. It's about 5 days ago. I talked to him. He was over in Sweden. His family's over there. He said he couldn't take it. He had to come back. He was thinking about going back to Sweden. And when he saw what's going on in Sweden, he's right back here in Florida. He said, no way. No way.
Yep.
He left because he said that place has gone insane. That's what he just told me. Sweden is nothing like it was 20, 30 years ago. Nothing. It's absolutely off the charts.
Yeah, nothing is like what it was 20, 30 years ago. Okay, listen, Tom, I got to let you go. The phone lines are loaded up, and people have been waiting very, very patiently. So let's switch over to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not what I called in about, but I just have to make this real quick comment real quick. I think people give the Pope far more credit than he deserves. If anybody's got the money to fund and direct all this craziness coming up from Honduras and all these other South American countries, it's people like George Soros, considering the fact that we've already caught his hand in that cookie jar, okay? So let's not give the Pope any more credit he actually deserves. Anyway, I really called in because, something hit me this morning as I was listening to the news on our local talk radio station, and it just really struck a chord with me because I'm starting to hear more and more of this with disturbing regularity, and I'm beginning to wonder if this country is worth saving. I
don't think it can be saved.
15 minutes.
We're just going to have to let it fall apart and then just focus on how we're going to rebuild afterwards.
Here's the thing. I heard this morning on the news about another mother being sentenced for starving her 16-year-old child. And so I did some looking on the internet, and just this year alone, okay, February, mother of two left her 2-year-old daughter to starve and freeze. This was in Decatur, Georgia. L.A. mom killed her old daughter and then throws her son from a balcony and then jumps herself. In March, investigators, they say they found a 3-year-old boy stabbed to death by his father. Again in March, a 2-year-old found dead in Minnesota after the father killed the mother. In Wisconsin, turns around, kills the boy or the 2-year-old in Minnesota. And then in April, a Phoenix man kills 4 people, including his wife and his 2 children, because his wife had an affair. That's just this year. I also found like 4 other instances of parents starving their children. I'm sorry, Mike, when a nation reaches this level, it's beyond, it's not even worth saving anymore. When we're worried, we are more worried about what Tom, Dick, and Jackass are doing halfway around the world and what other people are doing in other countries, and we're not even looking at the rampant murder of our babies. And people, you thought abortion was bad. You thought that the abortion issue is an issue. Folks, we're killing our 2, 3, and 4-year-olds and 16-year-olds and starving them to death and beating them to death and throwing them off of balconies and stabbing them to death. Seriously? This country has gone to hell, Mike.
Yep.
Literally gone to hell.
Well, I'm very fond of children. I always wanted to be a father. It never worked out. And I have zero sympathy for any parent who is gratuitously abusing their children, especially starvation. the question inevitably I'm going to ask is, are these parents all on prescription antidepressants? That's what I want to know.
I don't know, Mike. I'm a father, okay? I have 2 children. My children are grown. My son was born in 1980. My daughter was born in 1992. And they are the love of my life.
Yes.
I care more about them than I do anything else on this planet, including myself. And I could never imagine harming them. Just the very thought that a parent could do that to their child, it makes me ashamed to even think that I could in any way belong to the same race of creature. How do we allow this to happen, people? How? Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you for the phone call, and I agree with you wholly. We're going to let you go. Before we take other phone calls, breaking news from Venezuela. Venezuelan opposition figure Leopoldo Lopez has sought refuge in Chile's embassy in Caracas, while at least 25 pro-Guaido troops have asked Brazil for refuge. This looks like the U.S.-backed coup attempt is crumbling. And we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Boy, the phone lines are really busy today, so let's go to Peter in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm listening to these callers who are, sounds like just every week, everybody gets just a little bit more emotional, a little bit more edgy that this thing is coming a little bit closer to a head. But you know, when you look back, Mike, at the 2000 election, when George Bush was sort of a big change, we hoped he would have been from Clinton, and he wasn't. And then 2008, when Obama was supposed to be a big change, and he wasn't. And then 2016 was a real cry for help,
yes.
And people voted in Trump, and apparently, you know, he's not up to it either. But the events are overtaking it all, and even this sham government that only offers us up the same sort of people all the time, or preempts them. The only way out of it, Mike, that I can see, because you know, when I came to California years back, I mean, you could see this. When I came out here to play basketball in college, I could look around and see that the border was a problem. That was in 1970, and it was apparent visiting in 3 days that this was a problem, and it has gone more and more. And then I spent a whole career in the Army all over the world, and I should have been at the border. Our country has been invaded. We should have been at the border.
Yes.
The only way to get this done, I believe, is for, and I hate to assign this power to anybody, particularly Trump, but I guess he's as good as Biden about this, but somebody's going to have to declare an emergency to get something done. And that is, you know, actually declare an emergency, move the troops to the border. If the Joint Chiefs balk about it, then fire their asses.
I thought Trump had already declared an emergency for the border, and Congress had basically said, no, we're not going to let you go along with that.
Well, you know what? The councils of the National Resources Defense Preparedness executive order approved by Congress, we've talked about this before, says that he can do that. And by the way, he can also, if you have to wait till August and do it while they're on hiatus, and do it while they're on hiatus, and don't let them come back, because that's part of it, is they don't even need to report. The president doesn't even need to report, and Congress does not meet for a year. And then the president has to report back to them. But at any rate, with resistance from the deep state, the CIA, and the NSA, move the troops to the border, declare an emergency, and get this thing done. Otherwise, really, it really is over, and it's just a question of where and when we're going to drop dead. So,
yeah, I agree with you. It does seem like the situation is just going from bad to worse, and you sort of wonder, is anybody really thinking about what's good for the country, or is everybody just caught up there with their own little agendas, the Green New Deal, more votes for Democrats, and devil take the hindmost, as it were?
Yeah, it's been this agenda, as Nick, the old silent majority that Nixon talked about, has watched us going from, like, I'm talking about white Americans, and I'm somebody who's married to a black woman, and the person I love the most in my life is my daughter, who's mixed.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Okay, well, Peter, we got to let you go, and we got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with more phone calls in hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We've had a lot of callers today, and we're going to go back to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first, Mike, I want to talk about to Tom from Florida. Yeah, Mike, you said it yourself. Tom, the reason why Cuba is rubble is because you have economic sanctions on them. Why can't anybody figure this out? Venezuela was put economic sanctions on them.
Yes.
Like putting the squeeze on them, like the mafia does. You know, the same with the oil price war, putting a squeeze on them. So it's kind of hard to operate. Like if you own like a small business, if you got protection racket coming in every like week or a month, squeezing you, taking your hard-earned money out. That's the problem. Rubble is what we did in Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, and Syria. That's rubble, okay? And Mike, you're right with Venezuela because the coup is finished. It's over.
Yeah.
I mean, it's over because I've been watching this, and the only people I see like protesting is the kids from the barrios with the face masks on, throwing Molotov cocktails, who probably got paid $50 to do this. That's all.
Yeah, but corporate media is still pushing the line there. The moment is now. Guido calls for the military uprising against Maduro. But again, looking back at this Russia Today article, his people are deserting him, and they're seeking refuge in the embassies of other countries. So it looks to me like it is going to collapse, and by tomorrow, the story will have just gone away until it's time for the U.S. military invasion.
Tonight's going to be the most dangerous time because when it gets dark, there's going to be more like people trying to loot and stuff. The troublemakers, kind of like what Antifa is over here.
Yes.
Or when they were burning down like 7-Elevens, gas stations, they hated Trump or whatever. Type of the same mentality. But Mike, I was watching the people walking around. Boy, there's a lot of starving people over there. Everybody's got a cell phone. People don't look like they got holes in their pants or anything. I mean, if you're starving to death, the people have been walking around for hours, so it's all BS. I mean, and Mike, for that military, Guaido's got the military, he's trying to he's got like 10 or 20 people, and how do I know those aren't just his friends in uniforms? Like, we don't know that, it's all smoke and mirrors.
Yes.
But, and that Leopold Lopez, that's the dude they grab. For Maduro to grab, not Guaido, because Guaido is a laughing stock in Venezuela now.
Yes.
It's failed. It is totally failed.
Yep.
And that Lopez guy is more important of a grab.
Well, it's going to be impossible to grab him now because apparently he's now hiding out in Chile's embassy. Of course, Trump, may use what they did to the Ecuadorian embassy in London as his precedent and say, yeah, give us Leopoldo and we'll loan you a whole bunch of money.
And then real quick on Peter from Los Angeles. Yeah, the system, it's done because this system, everything's corrupt. The State Department, the Justice Department, we don't have any institutions that are like decent anymore. Like the whole, and it's all about money. There's no wall going to be built, people. There ain't going to send no military to the border. I mean, can you imagine when Trump came in 2 months after he come in? Imagine a wall was built. Now, 2 years later, imagine how much wall they could have been built.
Yes.
Nothing is done. Nothing will get done. This is all about money and politics at this point, and I just don't. And Yeah, I don't know how long this system's going to last, but I just don't see it long term like this infighting and this corruption and the obstruction crap. They're going to drag things on. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, Trump had a chance, and I know still people support him, but when the summer comes and goes, people, those left still supporting him, you're going to have egg on your face because there still ain't going to be no wall built and nothing's going to be done. So, and then also, Mike, no foreign interventions. This coup is an intervention of a sovereign nation.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is.
So I don't want to hear no excuses for Trump after the end of this summer comes. Okay?
Yep.
All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to Herman in Georgia. Aloha, Herman. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
I called, yesterday. Well, good. I called yesterday, but I forgot to mention some time ago there was this report that Mexican Army personnel came across the border and disarmed 2 U.S. soldiers.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
I saw a video of what it seemed to be about 6 masked individuals with AK-47 bringing what appeared to be a woman and a child across the border, and they went up the road to where these 2 soldiers were. So unless the Army wears a mask and looks like a cartel, that was not Mexican's Army.
Well, I didn't get to see that video, but I do notice that what should have been a serious international incident has kind of gone away. I know that Donald Trump made some noises toward the government of Mexico about not doing this, but I mean, there was so much going on down at the border that we don't understand and we're not being told. But if that video is accurate, and it is the incident that led to the disarming of the U.S. forces, I mean, human smuggling across that border is now big business. You know, these illegal immigrants, they're somehow able in their home countries to come up with enough money to be brought to the border and walked on over, escorted on over, clearly in this case.
Yeah, they walk through what barricade that's supposed to stop vehicles, but you can walk through it.
Oh, there are huge gaps. There are huge gaps in that fence. I mean, there's something like a 13-mile-long gap near Yuma, Arizona. And everybody knows it's there, and everybody just walks on through it.
Well, all right. I thought I'd check with you. Have a good one.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to go to Tom in Connecticut. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I heard that fellow talking about vaccines. It's really strange that the big outrage is for overeducated people, highly educated people that have researched this and found that they don't want vaccines for their children are the problem, which is such an oxymoronic piece of crap. I can't believe it.
Yes.
But it just, on top of that, okay, so they banned websites with anti-vax information or vaccine information.
Yep.
They banned websites like yours or Health Ranger or anybody, Alex Jones, pick anybody that's been delisted, deplatformed all along the line, right?
Yep.
But somehow, are you familiar with the John Whitehead article about underage sex trafficking in this country?
The one that just came out a week ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And these people use the web. These people use the web endlessly to solicit whoever for these endeavors. On top of that, the 60 Minutes thing this weekend about the fentanyl or any other drug you want from China that's freely, obtained through web information and oddly through the U.S. Postal Service. But somehow they can't find a way to deplatform or delist or ban this kind of stuff. It's just staggering. So, what are the biggest, problems in our country? Pick one But the horrific nature of that,
the
that
economy,
gun,
the infrastructure, the poor quality education.
I don't. But once again, getting back to the web and what they choose, that they have to know that's out there. These websites that are trafficking drugs, trafficking sex, but that's not a problem. Anyone that wants to offer alternate media information seems to be, their big issue, which is tragic, which is very tragic. So that's my little riff for today. So thank you very much. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, they got a thing there saying, Pompeo saying Maduro was on the verge of leaving, but Russians advised to stay. So now it's going to be all the Russians' fault that this phony coup isn't going to pan out.
It's going to be Russia's fault. It's going to be Cuba's fault. Bolton is up there now saying that Maduro's remaining leaves few alternatives, meaning they're talking about outright military invasion. But and was interesting, I was looking at the Fox News closed caption, and basically, hang on a second, there it is. They were saying where Guido was standing strong and Leopoldo Lopez is standing right next to him, and we know that's not the case. Lopez bugged out. He's hiding out in Chile's embassy in Caracas.
Well, I've been to Venezuela a few times, but I think that Trump is wrong. If he wants to overthrow any South American countries, he should start with Mexico and make it about immigration. And say, you're invading us, so we're going to do what we did with Pancho Villa, and we're going to go teach you a lesson like we've done several times in the past, and maybe keep a couple miles of your border area and mine it. If Trump would play this in the right way, he'd have a lot. He'd get my support. If he'd play it as any government, sending immigrants to our country is a form of war, and we will attack you and we will destabilize your governments and your country if you don't put an end to this. If your citizens don't stop invading our country, we are going to invade or do worse to you. But actually, the reason I wanted to call was about Biden.
Yes.
This guy is. They said he's 25 points above Bernie just a day after his big announcement.
Yes.
That's just the establishment. It's like what they're going to do to Bernie, what they did to Ron Paul, or what they did to him 4 years ago, or two and a half years ago. Biden is pathetic. Actually, I watched his speech. He's too old. He slurs his words. He doesn't appear to have any energy. He's got the Ukraine thing in his background, his son getting a billionaire from the oil over there, the groping. Trump is not saying anything about him because he would love to go against Biden.
Absolutely,
Biden
no question.
He's going to have the same energy level as Hillary did. And meanwhile, while Trump's going around having rallies with 20,000 people, he'll be in bed half the time, and when he gets out, he'll bring Jay-Z or somebody to get a crowd for him. But Biden, and he's never been a good candidate. He's like Hillary. He couldn't, he tried to run for president before, and he'd always get 1 or 2%. He's not a very, I don't know what the Democrats are going to, I hear people say about Trump this, Trump that. But, you got to beat him with somebody, and you need somebody that's a celebrity that's kind of going to have to be a little bit larger than life, because Trump is larger than life. No matter what you think of him, he's got that personality, that celebrity. Biden doesn't have a chance against Trump. I'm sorry. And the other thing is they're really, they're already starting to put Bernie on the back burner, and that's where all the energy for the Democrats is on the populist left. Put an old fart like Biden up there, and meanwhile, it's kind of like, what are they going to do? What's the left going to do? They're just because they hate Trump so much, they're going to get enthusiastic? I don't think so. That's not enough of a reason to get, to vote somebody in.
Well,
I just find Biden a very weak choice for the Democrats.
Well, better Biden than Hillary.
Oh, I'm ecstatic that Hillary appears not to be running, but I just can't believe that the Democrats can't find somebody a little. I mean, first of all, he's what 70-something years old, 76. I mean, that's. And he's a white guy. He's got the groping thing. I mean, and I'm not saying that I'm against white old guys myself, but the Democratic Party has become the party that has made all those rules. They're the ones that have, put this political correct poison and identity politic poison into the political atmosphere. And then here they go. They're going to have Biden up there. I mean, I find it hard to believe, but it is interesting to watch the political class and the establishment getting right behind old Joe.
Yep.
And you can see it in this fake poll they put out, how he's 25 points ahead of Bernie. Like, that's ridiculous. Anybody that knows anything knows that's a fake poll. It's classic.
Yeah.
Do it right away like this to try to build like there's this big enthusiasm. There's this big wave of Biden. Joe Biden. I mean, he's a joke. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. But
okay, well, Joe, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are finally open here. So getting on back to the news here, apparently Elizabeth Warren is accusing Biden of siding with credit companies over struggling Americans. So the war of words is already going on. Okay, we were talking about the international news. We're talking about immigration. And over in Europe, Spain's center-left Socialist Party won significantly in Sunday's election, but not enough of a majority to form their own government. They're going to have to partner with somebody for a coalition. But they are ruling out a coalition with Podemos for now. So that's not working out too well. Here's a kind of a bizarre story that makes you wonder, why did they bother in the first place? Federal prosecutors have been dropping child pornography cases for years in order to avoid scrutiny of the software used to bring the charges. This is coming from ProPublica. And obviously, the Department of Justice's actions raise questions about the accuracy and legality of their methods. But ProPublica has found more than a dozen cases since 2011 that were dismissed, either because of challenges to the software's findings or the refusal by the government or the maker to share the computer program with defense attorneys, or both. So like I said, why did you bother in the first place here? Story coming on out of your destination now. 4 Northern Virginia school systems are out there insisting there are thousands of their students who identify as transgender, and they're supporting a transgender teen's lawsuit filed because she was prevented from using the boys' restroom. This is coming from Gavin Grimm. She sued the school board in Gloucester County, Virginia in 2015, claiming that its policy violated Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. The Obama administration had ruled that Title IX, which in 1972 banned discrimination in public schools on the basis of sex, also banned discrimination based on gender identity. So that's rocking and rolling here. Congress is pushing the so-called Equality Act that will force American schools to allow male athletes to take part in female sports teams. So any guy who's out there who identifies as a female can invade any female space he chooses, including the sports teams. And I think it's utterly, utterly ridiculous. It certainly is going to discourage the girls from even going out for the sports. You're going to have the boys team and the tranny team, and that's going to be it. There's going to be no more girls teams. Story out of Hideout Now. Apparently a trans athlete just demolished 4 women's powerlifting world records. They do have an unfair advantage, a biological one. I can identify with being a tree. Doesn't make me a tree. I'm trying to identify with being a wealthy radio host. That's not working out too well either. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Over in Great Britain, they banned firearms some time ago. You can still own a gun, but it has to be kept and stored at a gun club. Not allowed to have them in your home, not allowed to carry them with you on the street, with the promise that this was going to lower crime. Well, to nobody's surprise, the exact opposite happened. Crime went up. And so British politicians, rather than back off and say, well, maybe we made a mistake here, they're going basically over the shark. They're calling for the banning of knives. British politicians have declared war on knives. And we're not just talking about the big, ugly ones. They're talking about kitchen knives. It's amazing. Over in California, there was an incident up in Sacramento. A pair of Elk Grove police officers were chasing a suspect and somehow managed to accidentally shoot each other in the legs. So for those who say only the police should have guns, little object lesson there for you. There's been yet another massive data breach. 80 million U.S. households. Security experts are saying the hackers could also have access to your name, age, and location information. So experts from VPN Mentor, a site that analyzes virtual private network services, discovered the exposed database storing the details of 80 million American households, or up to 65% of households nationwide. Boy, they got the treasure trove there. The database was hosted on a Microsoft cloud server and includes sensitive information like names, addresses, locations, gender, age, income, home type, marital status, and so forth and so on. If you are a health nut, you may have one of those so-called fitness trackers. It's kind of like a smartwatch, only a little skinnier, and it will read your pulse and basically provide feedback. But apparently they are notoriously unreliable, according to this article in the Daily Mail. Some of these fitness trackers are so unreliable, they don't know how far you are running. And apparently tests showed the worst offender misjudged a marathon by 11 miles. They didn't say which way. Story coming out of the Organic Prepper talking about, to prevent a robot apocalypse, we must study machine behavior. And this was once the stuff of science fiction, this idea of robot overlords taking over the world at some point. It's certainly possible with all of the AI. Apparently last week, a team of researchers made a case for a wide-ranging scientific research agenda aimed at understanding the behavior of artificially intelligent systems. I think that would be a very good idea. The group, led by researchers at the MIT Media Lab, published a paper in Nature in which they called for a new field of research called machine behavior. The new field would take the study of artificial intelligence well beyond computer science and engineering into biology, economics, psychology, and other behavioral and social sciences. Well, it sounds impressive, and certainly I'm not happy to see AI sort of run off and learn on their own without some kind of control. But remember what happened in Flint, Michigan, when that whole water scandal came on out? And I got a water test kit and found out the water we have here is actually pretty good. It's a little hard because it's coming out of a volcano. But other parts of the country are not so fortunate. And out in California, their tap water is now being suspected as being a source of cancer. So there's this new study at the Environmental Working Group saying that drinking tap water in California over your lifetime could significantly increase your risk of developing cancer and may have already contributed to more than 15,500 cases. Apparently, California's drinking water is contaminated with arsenic, hexavalent chromium, you probably remember that one from Hinckley and Aaron Brockovich, even radioactive elements such as uranium and radium. The team tested 2,700 different public water systems across California as part of their research, which served 98% of the state's population. The researchers then calculated the cancer risk by establishing the average contaminant levels between 2011 and 2015 and adding them together to create a lifetime risk. So again, industrial waste, pollution, toxic chemicals in the drinking water. Have to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show. We're out there talking about California, the poor quality of water out there, and as if that was not enough of a headache. Do you remember the Oroville Dam? Started to fail back in 2017, and they spent $1.1 billion to repair it, and it is already failing again. According to national dam expert Scott Cahill of Watershed Services of Ohio, Oroville Dam is on the same failure track as 2017, with visible water seepage trickling from the foot of the dam and dozens of points along the dam's principal spillway. So we're back to worrying about that one letting go. Now, here's kind of an interesting little story, and it came out of madnesshub.com. And there was this student, had gone to a Christian college, and he'd studied art. And he went public showing the art book that was approved for use by the Christian college, totally blacked out, including the Sistine Chapel. You know, all the little naughty bits have been blacked out. You're not allowed to look at any anatomy, as it were. Well, if you're going to study art history, what, you start by covering basically half of it up? I mean, this censorship is beyond ridiculous. Of course, I'm trying to remember the name of the Pope who literally went through the Vatican with a hammer and demanned all the male marble statues. Because certainly in the early days, the Catholic Church didn't have a problem with any kind of nudity. It started with Adam and Eve. All right. Here's a story that's a little less interesting. It's from Blacklisted News. Apparently, at the Portendown Laboratory in Wiltshire, between 2007 and 2017, around 48,000 animals, mainly pigs, monkeys, and guinea pigs, were killed in experiments. Apparently, Portendown reportedly tested experimental body armor by blasting animals covered with it with various explosives. It also tested poisonous substances, gases, and nerve agents on the animals. I know they're just animals, but to me, at least as far as the ballistic vests are concerned, you could use like a crash dummy and get meaningful data without having to blow up a pig. So anyway, the revelation of what's been going on was not received well by animal rights groups, with animal aids slamming the experiments for causing extreme suffering and death, calling them morally unconscionable. I would agree with that one. The non-governmental organization stated that such experiments are unnecessary and noted that the number of killed animals is alarming. So, anyway. Over at the Gates Foundation. Now, you know the Gates Foundation, they're out there, they're pushing vaccines, they're pushing depopulation. And now they're out there with a new agenda, which is to basically control access to nutritional supplements. Now, 76% of American adults, over 170 million people, rely on dietary supplements for increased energy, immune health, bone health, and overall wellness. Mostly vitamins and minerals. That's 98% of all nutritional supplements consumed. And yet, in spite of overwhelming public support for nutritional supplements, the multi-billion-dollar Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is sponsoring a plan that would ultimately threaten access to these vital nutrients at sufficient quantities needed for a therapeutic effect. This is hardly the first time this has been tried. For those of you who are familiar with colloidal silver, that was out there, very effective, broad-spectrum antibacterial, antiviral, and it got banned under lobbying from the pharmaceutical corporations. Now, fortunately, public demand got the FDA to back off, and it was put on out there again, but at lower levels of concentration. So if you want a high concentration, you have to make your own, which is what we do here. All right, let's take a phone call. Wayne in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. A couple very good discussions today, and one thing that I think Peter had earlier brought up was the executive authority to defend the border. And this has been kind of bubbling around in my mind, too, as Trump did declare the state of emergency. But I'm trying to figure out what's the legal principle at work that allows a group of liberal judges, which I guess was a Ninth Circuit, to stop this invasion. I mean, the facts are there with the amount of damage illegal aliens are doing, like in places like Texas and Arizona. In a 5-year period, we had like 700,000 crimes committed by them. And the thing that bothers me is, what if we had a couple thousand ISIS fighters invading the southern border, pillaging southern Texas? Would we still have to get the permission of the Ninth Circuit? Have you had any discussion with someone about that?
Well, the problem is that the presidential executive order or national emergency declaration has never really been fully codified into the law. I mean, presidents have been writing these things going all the way back to Richard Nixon, but it's never been settled, you know, how it actually is supposed to work. Up until recently, the president signs the executive order is carried out, end of story. Now, in theory, after the presidential executive order is placed into the Federal Register, Congress has 30 days to vote on it. But I have not seen anywhere where the Court of Appeals is able to override the president.
Yeah, it just does. You know, it's incomprehensible that we have this state of emergency where, again, the facts are there, and that we have to go through these legal basics to be able to protect our border. And if it was a serious invasion, it's just unbelievable to think that we'd have to sit there and wait for Congress to get off their butts and do something. And what they're going to do. They're probably going to delay it even more. So it's kind of crazy. And along these same lines, this whole kabuki dance with the amnesty and Judicial Watch also uncovered the fact that a lot of our tax dollars go through the USAID.
Yes.
They help fund some of the same groups that Soros is doing. So it just seems like there's some sort of a big game being played on us here. And again, that's one thing. And then nobody's asking the main question is, well, when these thousands of people are released to the interior of the country, how do they survive? Do they get automatically this welfare? Do they go right on the rolls to get housing, food, and all that?
Apparently, yes. I know that up until recently, they were even getting Section 8 housing subsidies.
Right. And I think Ben Carson was involved in trying to shut down some of the HUD subsidies, too. I think he's ran into some static on that. So hopefully he'll be able to accomplish something here. But it just really slays me that we can't, the president cannot stop an invasion of the country when there's absolutely no absolute proof that it's causing serious damage to the interior of the country.
Well, again, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is very, very liberal, no secret about that, and the liberals want those open borders.
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit of more news. Apparently, the White House is now warning Russia and Cuba to keep their distance. It's getting... Apparently, they're making the claim now that Maduro was ready to flee, but Putin told him to stay put. I'm not sure I believe that part of it, but it's certainly obvious how Guido's minions, they certainly bailed out very quickly. Anyway, Wayne, anything else? Okay, we're going to let you go. And the phone lines are open. White House insists all options remain on the table, meaning we're looking at war in Venezuela. We're looking at war all around the Caribbean. This is just insane. It is just insane. It's going to be another Vietnam. It really will. Okay, over in Chicago over this last weekend, they got 2.5 inches of snow, resulting in the cancellation of numerous flights out of the O'Hare Airport. And apparently this set a new all-time record for this date. The previous record had been set back in 1950. So gosh darn that human-caused global warming. Over in Colorado, they had a large amount of snow yesterday, and it is their biggest late season snow on record. Remember back in March 20th of 2000, the banner headline, "Snowfalls are now a thing of the past." They were lying to you. That's what they're paid to do, to lie to you. Okay, the CEO of Boeing, Muhlenberg, is finally taking questions regarding the deaths of 346 people in the October 29th Lion Air and March 10th Ethiopian Airlines crash. And typical of an airline executives was saying, in some cases, the proper procedures were not completely followed. But Boeing then later admitted that the disagree alert, which is an indicator to warn pilots about the kind of sensor failure that's been linked to both accidents, was not activated as intended. Now, the disagree alert, which is standard on the MAX planes, only works if the airline has also activated the angle of attack indicator, which is an option. Boeing then went on to change its story yet again and admit that there's a software glitch that disabled critical alerts on the 737 MAX, saying that an alert intended to notify pilots when the plane might be receiving erroneous data from one of the 737 MAX 8's angle of attack sensors wasn't disabled intentionally, as the Wall Street Journal reported on Sunday, but the feature had been disabled because of a previously undisclosed software glitch. So everybody's already thinking about what's going to happen with the lawsuits, and they're trying to basically lay the case. Boeing's in trouble. There's no two ways about it. Boeing is in trouble. They messed this one up real bad. Over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they're starting to get really nervous about the rate of growth of Ebola. They had 27 new cases confirmed in just 24 hours. This makes it obviously the worst day so far in the ongoing Ebola outbreak. And this is the highest daily toll since 18 cases of the killer virus were recorded back on April 10th. The epidemic began 9 months ago, and this outbreak is the second worst in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's history, with 957 feared dead to date. Now, obviously, my concern is going to be that one of these Congolese, because it is a conflict zone right now, the borders are open, they get out. They get to other countries. Worse, they get to Mexico and walk across the border. Nobody's doing any checking. Do you remember the British Petroleum oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, and how we watched it on TV and they struggled to contain it? It turned out to just be this epic corporate fail because British Petroleum had basically neglected the maintenance on the blowout preventer, which was a manual blowout preventer, which they were allowed to use under U.S. rules, whereas pretty much every other oil-producing nation on Earth requires an automatic blowout preventer, an acoustic blowout preventer. Well, it turns out there was a second spill that started about the same time, 11 miles off the coast of Louisiana, at what was called the Taylor Energy Oil Platform. And apparently it goes all the way back to 2004, and it is still going on today. 1,400,000 U.S. gallons of oil spill, and nobody's talking about it. So, anyway, apparently the contamination was noticed in 2010 during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Nothing going on. Okay. Let's grab a couple of news items here. Apparently, McDonald's are now hiring seniors because they actually show up. Apparently, they have a problem with young people just getting caught up in their cell phones or their smart pads or who knows what all else, and they're not reliable. The seniors are, so they're getting the jobs. Apparently, this much ballyhooed measles outbreak is finally over. Only one person went to the hospital. It was a sales pitch. It was a sales pitch, and even Trump got into it. He campaigned on vaccine safety, and when push came to shove, oh yes, go get your shot. It's a very, important thing that you get your shot. Okay, the corporate media, they've dropped Venezuela, at least for the moment. Now they're talking about a $2 trillion infrastructure package, and of course immediately everybody's saying, how are we going to pay for it? And I'm sure Alexandria's going to pipe up and say, we just pay for it. We just pay for it. Okay. Apparently, YouTube is losing a lot of money because people are turning it off because of the censorship. And Elizabeth Warren, I already mentioned that one. Okay, Tesla lost $702 million last quarter, snapping its profit streak. That's a lot of money to lose. And apparently its revenues were also down 37% compared to the prior quarter. Wall Street, well, we'll get to that when we have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here, final segment of our program today. And apparently there is a lot of entrepreneurial activity looking into the world of fusion power, small scale fusion power. And we're not talking cold fusion here. We're talking about hot fusion, but on a small scale. And they call it the SpaceX model, where these new startup companies are taking technologies that were developed by these giant experimental research projects with huge price tags, and they're basically trying to engineer them into something that is commercially viable. This would be a really good idea because fusion power is a lot safer than fission power. You have much less in terms of radioactive waste to deal with. It's very hard to make it go bang. And it could revolutionize our energy landscape. Of course, the oil companies are going to hate it. And I imagine initially these are going to be very expensive units intended for remote locations and not the urban environment. By the way, Japan actually makes portable radioactive thermoisotope generators like the ones on Viking and Curiosity that are sold to places like research stations in Antarctica to give them electricity for a long time. So that's a good use of the technology. Do you remember the movie The Martian? There was one thing I couldn't figure out. I mean, he went on out and he dug up that RTG to keep the front of his little rover warm, but didn't think to plug the RTG's electric output into the rover's motors. So he wouldn't have had to like do that thing with the solar cells. I don't know, maybe one is AC and the other's DC. Apparently, ransomware has struck another airport. According to WKYC, the malware impacted computers linked to the Hopkins email, payroll, and digital record system. Pardon me, digital signage around the airport was also affected, most displaying only black screens as the ransomware took hold. Now, ransomware infections, especially those that target critical infrastructure, can be disastrous. They very often they can end lives if they hit a hospital. Things could have been much worse in Cleveland, but the ransomware's reach was somewhat limited. So there's a good idea. Story coming out of government slaves about ex-CIA agent indictments coming for those who tried the coup against Trump. I'd like to see it. I don't think so. And I'm rather stunned that Trump, who was the target of a coup attempt, is just sitting there and amusing himself getting ready to bomb the heck out of Venezuela. Okay. Oh, there's the music. Okay. Time for me to get on out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you know, what you hear, what you learn with everyone that you know. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.